消える飛行機でも僕たちは見送った眩しくて逃げた悔しくて指を離す
Flashback. Years ago, I had just finished a certain anime called KyoAni, and was left with a gaping hole in my chest where my heart used to be. My natural inclination was to try to fill this void, so I searched for the nearest anime that would hopefully be similar enough to soothe my craving. That is when I stumbled upon the 2005 13-episode series, Air. Like KyoAni, Air is a key adaptation by Kyoto Animation, making up the first leg of the key KyoAni triumvirate, with KyoAni and Kanon 2006 filling in the rest. These three series have a lot in common, ranging anywhere from the nearly identical characters to the animation style to the storytelling in general. The plots themselves don't share much, but you can always expect a few things from a key work. Some supernatural elements, and the feels. So many feels. In fact, key adaptations are largely judged on just how feels-inducing they are, which, thankfully, is my area of expertise. Today, under the scope, I take a look at Air, KyoAni's first foray into the world of key visual novels, and all the feels that come with it. A broke traveler, Yukito Kunisaki, is determined to find the girl with wings up in the sky from an old tale he heard from his mother. After coming to a small seaside town, he stumbles upon a series of strange girls, deciding to put his mission on hold to help them with their problems. One girl in particular, Misuzu Kamio, is looking for a friend and invites him to stay with her and her mother Haruko. Soon, Yukito begins to realize, however, the winged girl may be closer than he thought. For the first 10 episodes or so, Air's story is rather pointless. Your typical sarcastic MC runs into girl after girl solving their problems and moving on. Once a girl's arc is over, you never see or hear from her again. It's nothing more than cheap feels fodder. I don't want to cry just because something sad is happening on screen. I want it to mean something to me, achieved through character development and real emotional depth, something Air doesn't do until the final arc. The dynamic between Misuzu and her mother in the last couple episodes is a great example of drama done right, managing to make you sad but also giving you good reason to. It's a shame the show didn't focus on it more, because this was where the real emotion was, telling a moving, incredibly powerful story about the power of a mother's love. If you're looking for the feels, this is where you'll find them. Unfortunately, the bond between the two isn't given near the attention it deserves, weighing its emotional impact down significantly. Instead of a focus on Misuzu and Haruko, we get 2 3-episode arcs on girls we don't care about, an unnecessary 2-episode flashback arc, that shit with the crow, and a recap episode, leaving us with just 2 episodes for the meaningful part. It's all extraneous to the real story and largely unnecessary. In particular, the flashback arc was a mistake. What it takes away in pacing and flow significantly outweighs what it adds in emotion and backstory. Breaking away from the main story in the middle of the show for a trio of characters we know nothing about poses some obvious risks, but Air fails to make it worthwhile. Instead of using up 2 whole episodes just to explain Yukito and Misuzu are the reincarnations of these other 2 characters, they could have just taken 5 minutes to say it, or simply cut this part of the story out altogether. Obviously, they would have had to refocus some things, but they should have done that anyway to give Misuzu and Haruko their proper story. Secondly, if I'm being brutally honest, the crow bullshit was just stupid. For starters, it's needlessly confusing and poorly explained, but the real issue is it's a blatant, totally avoidable deus ex machina. All of the other supernatural elements in the show are explained away well enough, they're just part of the world. This, on the other hand, comes out of nowhere, with no indication such a thing existed beforehand to let our MC fix his mistakes. The most frustrating thing about all of it is how unnecessary it was. With just a little more care, this entire plotline could have been totally avoided, yet still tell the same story. Finally, there's the 2 side arcs. The arc style of storytelling introduces a whole bunch of problems when it's not done right. In Kanon and KyoAni, each arc had essential development for the 2 main characters mixed throughout, whereas Air feels far more segmented. Outside of some super cryptic dream talk that won't make sense until the end of the show anyway, nearly all of Misuzu and Yukito's development occurs outside of the 2 side arcs, so much so you could skip episodes 2 through 6 and still follow the story. Instead of working together to solve the issues at hand, both feel more like pawns to the plot. The character growth isn't woven throughout, but rather designated to specific portions of episodes, ultimately detracting from each arc's impact, especially Misuzu's. The other issue is, of course, how much time these arcs then take away from the main story. For a 13-episode series, to waste 6 on largely non-essential side stories that add little to nothing in the way of emotion or character development for our main duo is a significant waste of time. Add in the 2-episode flashback, and you're left with way too little screen time to produce an emotional, deep story. At least not to the level Air tried to attain. Perhaps that's Air's biggest problem. It was too ambitious. It presented a lot of fascinating ideas, but didn't explore them enough to leave much of an impact. Whether it be a half-baked explanation or some out-of-nowhere supernatural gimmick, Air tried to take on way too many concepts at once, ultimately preventing it from doing any of them particularly well. KyoAni's later attempts at keyworks produced far better results in this area, with Kanan a noticeable improvement, but Clannad the perfect success, thanks in large part to the added screen time, but also the focus on constant character development. But while KyoAni may have learned their lesson, it doesn't excuse the faults of their first try. Air is the classic case of trying to do so much, you wind up doing nothing at all, though that's a bit of an exaggeration. The story definitely had its bright moments, particularly at the end, but the lack of any real direction or proper character development takes away from the climax's impact, leaving us with a story that pales in comparison to the emotion of KyoAni's later key adaptations. The one thing a show like this has to do above all else is make you care about the characters. If you don't feel that sense of attachment, then anything that happens to them will blow right by you with no emotional depth. Sure, if some rando dies on screen and everyone's crying, I'll be sad, but able to move on rather quickly. If, however, it's a character I care deeply about, I'll be broken, like I just lost a part of myself. Without trying to sound too melodramatic, my point is Air failed to make me care about the vast majority of its cast until it was too late. So when the emotional moments came, nothing hit me particularly hard. Bear in mind that the only reason the show exists is to make you sad. For the majority of the series, I only felt attached to Misuzu because I was supposed to be. All she does for the first 5 episodes is fall on her face, drink peach nectar, say gao, and a bunch of other moe shit. Once we delve deeper into her character later on, the attachment grows, but by then the show's almost over. At the start of the final arc, I did care about Misuzu, but not even a fraction of how much I cared for Ayu or Nagisa from Kanan and Clannad, and each of these characters had basically the same personality. They're all equally likable. Part of it again has to do with the show not devoting enough time to her, but the bigger issue is the detachment between the characters and the audience at the start. Air kept the backstories, motivations, and thoughts of its characters way too tightly guarded for far too long. I didn't feel like I really knew the characters until well over halfway. Air also failed in its side characters' development. Their stories were far too rushed for the drama to really hit home, and I honestly could not have cared less about them. For an example of this done well, look no further than Kanan. My 2 favorite arcs in that series were side arcs, and every single one of them left a heavy emotional impact. Air, on the other hand, falls completely flat. It shifted focus away from its main cast for far too long, but still didn't devote enough time to the supporting cast for me to care about them either. It needed to choose one or the other. Give Misuzu and her story the proper telling, or focus more on the side characters. Instead, it achieved this odd middle ground that left both sadly underwhelming. If there's one thing Air nails, it's the atmosphere. Bear in mind, this show aired in 2005. The backgrounds with their watercolor style look great, and the movements of the characters are extremely fluid. Of particular note is the animation of the clouds. Damn, they're gorgeous. Whenever I think about Air, the first thing that pops into my head is always those breathtaking clouds, followed by a bunch of moe shit. But the point is, those clouds. Now, this is a KyoAni key adaptation we're talking about, so naturally the character designs jump out at you immediately, I'm sure. Really, this is a matter of preference. If you don't like the huge eye, mushed face look, so be it. Could the style have been done better? Certainly. In fact, it was, with Kanan looking far more polished and Clannad perfecting the look. Even if you're not a fan of the style though, I hope you won't let something like that get in the way of watching these shows. Especially this one. Moving on, Air's sound completes the atmosphere. The OST strikes the perfect balance of emotional and soothing, a great fit for the rural sea setting. Specifically, the track Natsukage is truly a beautiful piece. It stuck in my head long after I finished the show and honestly built it up in my mind as better than it actually was. Great music can do that. Make me remember a show more fondly than I otherwise would have, and Air's no different. Of course, I can't talk about the sound without mentioning the opening and ending. Both are fantastic, but the opening is one of my favorites of all time. It's beautifully animated and a perfect fit for the series with its airy feeling. Again, those clouds. Lastly, for you dub watchers out there, Air actually has a pretty good dub and is one of the few examples of a moe show whose dub doesn't make me want to tear my ears off. Air's animation and sound is without a doubt its best asset, creating a unique atmosphere the rest of the show may have failed to live up to, but was still a pleasure nevertheless. If you asked me to give you my impressions of Air after my first run through, I probably would have said it was an okay drama with a compelling story, fun characters, and a fantastic atmosphere, but nowhere near the level of Clannad. At that time, of course, I'd only seen 7 other anime series, so my basis for comparison was rather limited. Now, having come back to it years later with loads more experience under my belt, that opinion worsened somewhat. Air is a drama with great potential. It has an intriguing story that mostly fails to deliver, characters too unexplored to leave an impact, and still a fantastic atmosphere. Air could have been just as wonderful as its successors, with a few plot tweaks, a shift in focus, and more character development, but at that point, it'd hardly be the same show. Instead, it's another unfortunate case of missed potential that I know for a fact many will laud as Key doing what Key does best. Air might make you cry, but ask yourself, why are you crying? Is it because the characters on screen are sad, or is it something deeper? Chances are, it's only the former. So with that, I award Air an approval rating of pass, unless you're a huge fan of Key's other adaptations, as well as an overall score of 2.8 potatoes out of 5. Really, forget the rating. My recommendation boils down to this. If you're a fan of Key and liked Clannad and Kanan, definitely watch Air, as while I doubt you'll enjoy it more, I'm sure you'll still get some of what you want out of it. If, on the other hand, you generally aren't a fan of these types of shows, then don't bother. Air's not going to change your mind. It's definitely my least favorite Key adaptation, and while I do think it has its merits, it's still the one I come back to the least. If you're looking for something similar to Air, first off, there's the aforementioned other Key adaptations: Kanan, Clannad, Little Busters, and Angel Beats 2, even though it technically isn't an adaptation. This is a bit of a mixed bag of shows, so if you're unsure, let me just say Kanan and Clannad are the two highlights, with the latter being must-watch material. If you want something that isn't a Key work, check out Sola for a surprisingly similar story about memories and destiny. Sola has some of the same issues as Air, but if you liked one, you're sure to like the other. And that'll do it for me. If you're feeling particularly generous, please consider checking out my Patreon page. Shout out to Full Metal Ghoul for donating. Any amount of help keeps me able to devote so much of my time to making videos, so thank you. Please subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and feel free to follow me on Twitter at UTS Reviews. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time.